So I want to talk about that today in the context of what it is that you're here to talk about, which is this whole notion of how we reach a multicultural market. Now, why is this important? You've really talked about all this, so I'm going to go through it very quickly. As a matter of fact, I know I talk fast. My dad was from the Bronx. Please listen fast and we can get a lot more done, okay? So we know that there are potential challenges in terms of the changing demographics. You've heard all of that. You know that the people who are out there who are buying are different than they used to be. You also know that our way of looking at things is guided by the particular culture we come from. So if we're talking to people out there who are from a different culture, we need to adjust ourselves in that particular way. The reason I want to talk about the unconscious mind is because some of what happens in that interaction is visible to us, and enormously more of it is invisible to us. And so, you know, Freud said one of Freud's great gifts to culture and science was this notion of the unconscious, and he said that the conscious was the tip of the iceberg and the unconscious was the larger part underneath. Our current research shows that the conscious is more like the snowball on the tip of the iceberg. That virtually everything we do is governed by our unconscious in certain ways. And so we'll look at that and play with that in just a little bit. That in order to do this, we need to develop competencies to get there. And also that there are things that we need to consider. So we're going to be looking at all those as we go forward. Now, we know, as I said, just to move through these quickly because you've been talking to them, we need to understand the needs of diverse customers, and that means customer acquisition and customer satisfaction, that we need to tailor our messages to the marketplace. And there's also a third piece which I think is really important for us to understand, and that's the way you represent yourself in the marketplace has an enormous amount to do with who decides that you're the place that they want to work. That when we're particularly in a diverse marketplace, in a diverse world, when people are sitting out there with choices about where they can work, when the most talented people are saying, what company do I need to work with, if they are people particularly who have an experience at times of being excluded by organizations or feeling excluded in organizations, and they see in the marketing that you're sensitive to these issues, that's a signal this might be a good place for me to come from. And so I want to just add that to the mix because I think it's important to recognize that this really impacts virtually everything that we do in organizations. So what are some of our challenges? One is missing the market, not understanding trends in the market, patterns in the market, the things that people are concerned about and that's important to them. Missing their core needs in that same sense. Missing the memes. How many people have heard of that word, memes? Okay, good. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, but that's the culture. Those are the cultural norms that people have in their different cultures. So the subtle things sometimes that are important to certain groups that we may not see simply because they don't show up the same way in our particular cultures. Missing the media. And I don't mean simply what we put on the media, but also where in the media we place things, who watches what, who listens to what, who reads what. Missing the messages that are key to those kinds of groups, missing the images and symbols. You know, I had a great experience of this back, gosh, it's been a number of years now. I was doing some work with the Indian Health Service. And one of the people I met there was a remarkable guy named J.T. Garrett, who grew up on the Cherokee Reservation, the Red Bank Cherokee Reservation in North Carolina, and was trained by his grandfather to be a medicine man for the tribe. His grandfather was the tribe's medicine man. But then he was also sent to college by the tribe because he was the top graduate in his school and eventually got a Ph.D. in public health. So he was a trained Cherokee medicine man who had a Ph.D. in public health. Ain't that a mix, right? He told me this story. He said a number of years before, out in the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, the Army Corps of Engineers had built a hospital. And they found, in the end, this was often the case, the Indian Health Service commissioned the Army Corps of Engineers to build the hospitals. And traditionally, the way they did it a number of years ago was with very little interface with the local community. They came in, plunked down the hospital, and left. So nobody was coming to the hospital. And they couldn't figure out why. So JT told me he took a ride out there, or flew out there, and went to the hospital. He said it took him about 9 seconds when he walked into the hospital to realize what the problem was. You see, as in most hospitals, they had painted, in those days particularly, they had painted the walls white. But the only problem is, in the Navajo Nation, white symbolizes death. Wouldn't you love to go to a hospital that was painted black, for example, or all the walls, you know? It was a mistake that was made not because anybody was building a hospital to keep people out of it. It was a mistake that was made because they missed the symbology of the color in that particular culture. And then also missing the linguistics and how we use language. So I want to talk about all of those things. Now, we got some classic mistakes, and most of you have seen 100 different examples of these. You know, Parker, when they translated their "it won't leak in your pocket and embarrass you" into Spanish, said "it won't leak in your pocket and make you pregnant." You know. Not exactly the message that they were trying to get across. When Purdue said it takes a strong man to make a tender chicken, that was translated again into Spanish as it takes an aroused man to make a chicken affectionate. I guess there's a particular market they might have been going for, but I doubt if that's the one that got this message. American Airlines said fly in leather became vuelo en cuero, which means basically fly naked. Again, might appeal to a certain market, but not the larger one. So, and then finally, our famous got milk advertisements, which translates into are you lactating? So, and we could go into hundreds of examples like this, and I'm sure that in this room you probably have collected these stories and heard these stories as well. And they're pretty amusing. For us here, not necessarily for the people who are designing the advertising, or in some cases the people who lost their jobs because they weren't more sensitive to this. But it really speaks to the heart of the story I told you about my granddaughter, because I would bet my car that these people who created these ads did not know what they meant and say, who cares? You know, they didn't say, I don't care what it's translated into Spanish. They didn't know it, and they didn't know that they didn't know it. And that's at the heart of this conversation for all of us, because inside of the diversity inclusion conversation, we've lived in this sort of good person, bad person paradigm. You all know what I mean? It's like there are people like us who are good people, fair people, treat people equitably, that sort of thing. And then there are those other people, those bad people who do all that stuff that we've heard about, right? But in reality, what we're finding now is far more of the things that happen, particularly in organizational life, are not things that are done by people who are bad or who don't care. They're things that are done by people like you and I who have the best of intentions but don't even realize that we all have blind spots as human beings. Now, in interactional basis, this shows up as bias, and we know that sometimes. But even bias is something we misunderstand, because in reality, bias is a fundamental human function. You know, we treat it like it's a pejorative, something we need to get rid of, but in actuality, we couldn't survive without it. If I were to come up to one of you, for example, with a knife in my hand like this, you wouldn't say, I wonder what that is and what he's going to do with it. Right? You would immediately, viscerally swing into action, either fight or flight usually, right? We know that there's certain things that our system is trained to keep us safe for. And this also shows up in our interpretive structure and the way we work, and I want to talk more about that. And I'm inviting you, as we do this, to do what I call putting a flashlight on yourself. Not in blame, but in just to notice, where might I have a tendency to see certain things and not? Where are my blind spots? Because we all have them. The operative word is we, including all of us, every human being. See, so I want to talk about this in terms of the unconscious mind.